Hey, welcome back to the Believe, Be Real, Be Bold podcast. I'm here with my honored guest, Shawntres Parks from California. How are you today?
I'm doing well. Excited to be with you.
Thank you very much for taking the time out of your busy day. We met through Dr. Sarah Shevitz, who
Mhm.
is of Couples Learn, and you are now a teammate with her. Is that correct?
I am. Yeah, I just joined the Couples Learn team a little over a month ago.
hmm And what kind of an experience does that bring for you serving your clients?
I would say the most exciting thing about working with Dr. Sarah and Couples Learn is the opportunity to expand the amount of people that I'm able to work with and the opportunity that I have to work with kind of my ideal client. Because it's virtual therapy and coaching, I work with clients internationally and all throughout the 50 states. So it's really exciting to be able to, one, of course, meet so many different people, but also to kind of be able to live out my passion in such a big way.
hmm And the technology via Zoom really makes the world a small place. It's almost as if like we are in the same room when we're talking this way.
Right, exactly. And so it's pretty cool, I would say, just to be able to connect and kind of have this shared experience, right, from hundreds or thousands of miles away.
hmm And let's back up a little bit. How is it and why did you choose to take the path down the road of counseling?
Ultimately, I would say that the decision for me was very much a spiritual one. I had come through a really difficult divorce. And so, having come out of that experience, or actually was in that experience when I kind of had the revelation that I was called to do this work, I had this experience of feeling really disconnected from myself, really disconnected from my faith, disconnected from hope that relationships could still work, or that I could find my ideal person, especially coming out of a marriage where you're really expecting, like, this is the it, the end result, this is it. And so I was going back and forth. I was studying psychology, and I thought maybe I'll go the childhood, development, early childhood education route, because I was really excited about the work that I was doing in that field. But it wasn't quite sitting with me that that was going to be it. And it was actually just a night of soul searching and really kind of turning inward, where I identified that what I was most passionate about was giving people the opportunity to experience the healing that I was going through at that point. I wanted more tools, I wanted more education, more experience, more training to be able to, one, take myself out of it, and two, to be able to kind of have this Moses moment where I could kind of go back and liberate others who were also kind of trapped in that emotional bondage that comes from relationship trauma.
hmm And you were in early childhood development, and it was almost like you were having these conversations already with the parents of the students, right?
Absolutely. That was definitely a great training ground, just to be able to be in that place where I was a parent and obviously very ill equipped, as a lot of parents feel, because unfortunately, when this kid popped out, she didn't come out with an instruction manual. And so knowing that I was having to navigate so many different challenges, and I found that, like, yeah, it's great to have all of the research, and kind of the comfort that the research provides, and that, like, okay, here are things that are tested that are helpful for bonding with your child, for disciplining your child, for creating safety and security for your child. But if you don't work through whatever it is that you have that stops you from feeling safe to attach, it's really hard to create a sense of safety for your kid. And so having these experiences with parents and seeing that a lot of parents were in a position where they kind of needed to do their own work before they could really be the conscious parents that they were desiring to be, really helped me to see that I could do a lot of good in early childhood education, but I could probably do more good in therapy, being able to help people to overcome those blocks.
hmm And there's a little statement in there that you made that really excites me about bringing you on as a guest through a referral from Dr. Sarah's. You said the feeling that it is safe to attach, and I really want to dive into that concept in a minute. But first, before we do that, let's talk a little bit about who you're passionate about working with most.
I would say at this point in my career, I'm most passionate about working with women. Love the guys. The fellas are awesome, but I get super excited about the experience that I have working with women, specifically women who have been through trauma, big T and little t trauma, who are finding that it is very difficult for them to identify who is a right fit for either dating or marriage, or they may already be in marriage. But regardless of the nature of the commitment of the relationship, they're having difficulty feeling safe to attach to another person. They're having difficulty being able to listen to their intuition when there are what I call red, orange, yellow flags that denote that there may be some risk involved in this relationship. And they're also having difficulty having critical conversations when they're identifying that there's this risk present.
Mm-hmm. Red, yellow, orange. Is that right?
Yeah.
And there's also another color too. It's green flags.
Mm-hmm.
And the green flags are almost harder to spot because as the nature of the being, we're almost like picking apart what's wrong instead of what's right.
Mm-hmm.
And that brings us back to that feeling safe and secure enough to attach.
Yeah.
And if we have this experience in our life of little t, big T trauma, it's almost going to feel unnatural and unfamiliar when you find somebody that is secure in themselves and secure enough to attach to. Can you kind of help me professionally or clinically kind of put that thought together from red, yellow, orange, green flags, and then finding somebody, what it feels like to be secure and then find the attachment there?
Absolutely. So I would say going back to the beginning, the way that we establish our own kind of thermometer for these green, yellow, orange, red flags typically has its roots in our childhood attachment experiences. If we have a preferred caregiver who responds to our attachment cues with some level of consistency, we tend to develop what's called secure attachment. And that secure attachment means that we have a safe harbor to run to when life is difficult, when we fail, we make these mistakes, we feel like, we have these moments that we feel unlovable or shame or whatever it is that comes up. We have a person that we can run to for comfort and for reassurance and security. So we've got that resilience. We also have a safe base to launch from. And so what that means is when I need to try something new and take a risk, I know that I've got this person back there that kind of has my back in the event that I do fail and kind of fall flat on my face. And so because I've got that safe harbor, safe base, that means I have the ability to kind of be the fullness of who I am in the world. If we didn't have the benefit of having those really secure attachments early on in life, or we maybe had those secure attachments, but we had these little t, big T trauma experiences, we have this hyper arousal where the world begins to feel unsafe and people in certain situations or circumstances begin to feel unsafe. And because we have this hyper arousal and we're constantly thinking that things are unsafe, we're, as you said, identifying what's wrong, always looking for the reasons that this is going to fail, the reasons that this person is going to leave me, the reasons that this person is just like everybody else who's hurt me. And if that's the perspective that we're taking, then even when that person is doing things to the contrary, we're going to be hyper focused on all of the things that say, no, no, abort, danger. And that stops us from being able to, one, kind of be at peace in the relationship or even be at peace in our body, but also to be able to create in the person that we're with this sense that we appreciate and acknowledge that they are maybe the great person that they are. On the other hand, we also have situations where you might be in a relationship with a person that's less than secure, and maybe that person has a similar trauma call, right? And so it's the whole birds of a feather thing, right? That person's wounding is similar to my wounding, and so like calling to like, I find myself in situations with people who have the same shadow work that they need to do that I have to do, and so in those situations, I'm looking for something to be safe because I want this person to be okay. And I'm more focused on kind of that interdependence that's maybe less than healthy than I am on actually meeting my needs for safety and security in the relationship.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. I've gone pretty much through every single level that you were just describing there. And there
Okay.
was so much good information that we're going to have to dissect it a little bit. So a key point that I want to bring up is the brain is always trying to connect the dots. That's our survival mechanism.
Mhm.
And when you were talking about like, we're going to find the negative in order to protect ourselves, we find ourselves have with a self-fulfilling prophecy. And then we're going to go even further and find this confirmation bias where like we're supposing or we're assuming that the other person is going to leave us or become clingy or any number of these red flags, deal breakers that people talk about without necessarily understanding the root of it.
Mhm.
And what we've uncovered over the 18, 19, 20 months of recording the podcast is that attachment theory and attachment styles has a lot to do with these repeated patterns that we're finding.
Mhm.
And
I would say that, yeah, attachment is crucial. But I think one of the things that I feel like I have to share is that a lot of times people feel pressure when they hear how important attachment is. You feel like, well, that means I have to be a perfect person in relationship in order to create a sense of security for my partner. Maybe if your partner is the person that's a little bit gun shy because they have that trauma history, or if you're the person who has the history and you're working through it, you feel like my partner has to respond appropriately every single time in order to create that security. But the research shows that it's not necessary to be perfect in order to create secure attachment. We've just got to be able to kind of meet the expectation and respond appropriately more often than not.
mm-hmm. Yeah, it's like getting a grade A or the A
Right,
in class. Like you don't have to have 100% in order to receive an A.
right.
And what I do love about this journey to authenticity that we're exploring here is that it's very fluid
Mhm.
and it's not linear. It's
Right.
not even peaks and valleys. It's more of like this squiggly line where when we find a repeated pattern, we come back to it, we
Yeah.
circle back, and then we address it again.
Mhm.
And that's the huge value that I've found through that shadow work that you were talking about is like, okay, the only way out is through.
Yes.
What is the next key piece of the puzzle that I need to unravel from my childhood, my little T, my big T, in order to be the healthiest version of myself so that I can attracting like.
Yeah. I think there's a lot of pressure there, right? Because a lot of times the women that I'm working with, we do an exercise where I kind of walk them through this guided imagery visualization where they're imagining their ideal partner, and we have them journal about it. They'll talk about aloud some of the things that come up during the meditation, and then they'll write down some of the attributes or characteristics. And one of the things that I always point out is that for everything that you're writing that you would like to see in your partner, how much of that do you embody yourself, right? Where is that manifesting in your own life? And a lot of folks really want authentically to have an emotionally healthy partner, right? And for most of us, we have our own woundings, our own big T, little t trauma that we're working through. And having that history doesn't mean that we are not the authentically healthy people that we want to attract. It just means that there is a necessity to constantly be doing that internal work, as you said, to be going through in order to get out so that we can kind of perpetually be in that state of doing the work so that we can be the healthiest person, because it's really hard to draw that in when you're not embodying that yourself.
Mm-hmm. Very well said. And I want to kind of highlight that point of the expectation of being perfect before we get into a relationship or before we commit or before we take the next step, etc. And the question that I have while we're on this little t, big T is, when does someone know that it's the right time for them to, or that they are ready to be in a relationship while they're exploring their history of trauma?
I would say that one of the obvious things that jumps out to me when I'm working with someone and we're identifying, is this the right time, right? We're doing trauma recovery work and they have a desire to be partnered or at least to explore dating. How triggered are you by kind of general conversation topics that might come up on a date or when you're meeting someone? Do you have the ability to communicate the aspects of your narrative that you would realistically need to share with a partner without becoming very emotionally reactive. So an example of that would be like folks that have been through sexual abuse, sexual assault trauma. Have you come to a place where you're able to share the aspects of your narrative that would be imperative, meaning that before I'm getting physical with someone, I'm able to communicate some things that may be very well off limits for me? And can you communicate that with some assertiveness, and not like a whole lot of shame coming up for you in those moments? Because depending on how quickly you decide that you want to engage in physical intimacy with someone, they may or may not have the ability to hold that space for you if you're being very triggered in that moment. And so I would say, to be able to really do that work either with a coach or therapist or close friends, people who know about your story, to be able to kind of talk through some of the points where you think you might still be a little bit stuck before you take that jump. So that way, when you start that process, you're not finding yourself like triggered on date 1, date 2 with someone, right? Where you don't really have the kind of the emotional intimacy there to really be vulnerable in those moments.
Mm-hmm. I completely agree. And that timeline is different for everybody. Um,
Absolutely.
it takes a lot of work, especially if we're talking about the trauma you were describing of sexual abuse and sexual assault,
Mm-hmm.
which tends to last and stick around for a really long time. And it's layers deep. So
Yeah.
if we're having a conversation around it, and we have to know that there's a time and a place for that share.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not sure if you're a big fan of Brene Brown or not, but
Yes, lover.
right. So she's talking about oversharing a little bit and daring greatly,
Mm-hmm.
as well as like kind of understanding that transparency has a timing as well that's appropriate when you're building a romantic relationship that's trending towards physical.
Right. And I think that like transparency, I believe in transparency in all things. I always gauge what is the gauge to which I can be transparent. Like, to what degree can I be transparent with this particular individual in this particular situation or setting? But for folks who have not had a ton of security or maybe have some of the more big T trauma experiences, the gauge can be off. And you may have an experience where, again, in that difficulty to identify that someone is safe, you may find that you often have experiences where you share a lot to test, are you safe or not? Like, I'm going to share all of this information with you. Will you run away? Can you handle me or what I've been through? Which I feel to some degree can be a little bit unfair to the hearer or the receiver of that information. Because it really is putting someone in a situation where before they've even had a chance to maybe communicate that they're in it to that degree, that you've already kind of dumped on them. And so I do think, as far as like determining at what point do I share, and how safe is this relationship, how ready am I to be dating, all of those things I think are dependent upon always still holding space for that time place rule, right? That maybe I'm ready to date casually, but I'm not looking to be maybe especially emotionally intimate with someone at this point. Okay, great. And so what if you find that one particular relationship starts moving a little bit faster than you expected, but it's feeling good, everything is looking good? Okay, now I need to occupy that time and place rule and sit in that and say, okay, we're a few dates in, maybe it's a little bit further than I expected, we're moving fast and attaching quickly. I might want to explore sharing a little bit. But before I share, I might check in with someone that can kind of help me to determine whether or not this really is a good time. And so using community to be able to get that advice or support when you feel like maybe your thermostat might be off.
I totally agree with that, because community is one of our core values here at on the podcast. It's actually why we started it in the first place, is to build a community of authentic daters so that we just had better people to choose from to support us, whether that's familial,
Mhm.
friendly, or a romantic relationship.
Yeah.
And so to your point of having a sounding board, somebody who's maybe neutral or more objective than a friend, because they're
Mhm.
super subjective when it comes to like, hey, we've been out like 2 or 3 times and I really want to kind of, you said the word test, and I immediately thought of like, okay, yes, that's definitely testing the interest of the other person, as well as like how far they are in it, you
Mhm.
know? And that's a hard conversation to have, because like hey, we've been dating 4 or 5 dates. I feel as if I could provide a little bit more context if I share this with you. Are you available for that conversation?
Hmm. And I think the setup is ideal there, right? To be able to give someone a full informed consent, right? Where I'm giving you enough information before the share to allow you to opt out if you're not ready before I have really kind of exposed myself.
Hmm. And then there's always a support system behind the scenes too, like somebody like yourself. My counselor for 20 months, Hannah, was always like Team Dave. She was my sounding board, and she gave me the safe space to basically fill it with what I needed to fill
Yeah.
and kind of dump there, which was a very, very safe space for me.
Mhm.
And it became even safer over time.
Yeah. I love that you point it back to that behind the scenes safety that comes from therapist or coach. And I think that so many people benefit from that. So many of my clients that come in to work on things that are unrelated to dating or relationship, we always end up going there, right? Because as whole people, like our desire to attach in ways that are romantic and ways that are not romantic is such an integral part of who we are that it's always going to come up. And if you find yourself in a position where you can receive any sort of professional support that's going to be objective and hopefully unbiased and kind of just nurturing and supportive in a time where you really need a lot of nurture and support, then I mean, taking advantage of that is going to be crucial, I think, for your success, especially as you said, if you're finding that you're only that you're very friend saturated or friend advice saturated, where you're getting a ton of well-meaning and well-intentioned advice that's not necessarily helping you to get the love that you want or the results that you want in a relationship. I hear some really funny stories about things that friends say, and I find that when I hear it, I'm thinking like, wow, it's coming from such a good place, but it's such an awful thing to do. Like, I probably wouldn't recommend something like that. So I think that's helpful. The online course that I've developed is really to be able to help women to listen to their internal voice, right? Instead of needing as much confirmation from external places or people or things, they're able to kind of connect spiritually and be able to listen to intuition. For folks that have been through big T and little t trauma, intuition can be hard to check into. So I help women to remove those blocks. And for women who come through the course, they also are in community with one another. So they're like minded women who are doing the exact same work, right? Circumstance is always different, but they're a community of women doing the same work at the same time. They're kind of coming through it together, and they provide support not just during the course, but then also after the course, to be able to specifically look for right fit in relationship and dating, and to be able to look at even right fit in marriage, right, for those who are already committed.
Hmm. And since you were talking about that intuition,
Yes.
I have a fantastic, it's an idea brewing in my mind based on our conversation yesterday, is like when the alarms are going off in your intuition, does like lashing out, does shutting down, does running away help us kind of become more aware of those triggers, for one?
Mhm.
And then two, does that help us kind of identify our attachment style so that we can redirect and become a little bit closer with our partner to be, or somebody that we want to be with, or our current partner?
I would say absolutely. I think that anytime the alarms are going off in your intuition, those intuitional alarms, if you will, are indicators, right? For me, it is the check engine light of your body. It's saying that there's something that's going on that we need to pay closer attention to. It's not always saying that we need to act. It's not always saying that just because my inclination, because these alarms are going off, is run away, that doesn't mean that I actually need to run away from this relationship or it's a bad relationship. It may be an indicator that my attachment style is more fearful or more avoidant, right? If I'm trying to shut down. Um, it also may be an indicator that this is a place where I need to do some more work, where I need some more support, where I need to engage community, where I need to engage professional support, where I need to engage spiritual support, where I need to just have some time to listen to myself, right? And not take in all of the other external advice or information, just to be alone with me, right? And see what comes up. Journaling, I think, is a great resource for that. It's always an indicator of something. I would say long story made longer.
Yep. And I see that self-awareness coming into play. Like, I can almost paint the picture of a couple sitting in a living room, and somebody is getting defensive and they're like, oh, I'm becoming more aware that this just triggered me. How does that person welcome their partner into that space and create this kind of safe and secure and curious environment to actually work through that moment in time?
Well, I would say emotionally focused therapy for couples, created by Dr. Sue Johnson, is a great remedy for a situation like that. Because in emotionally focused therapy for couples, the specific remedy for that, right? I'm having this conversation and I'm feeling triggered in this moment, is that I get to turn to my partner and communicate how I'm feeling, and communicate specifically that what's being triggered is an unmet attachment need. Right. And so after coming through emotionally focused therapy for couples, you actually have the tools to be able to identify what is my primary kind of unmet attachment need that keeps popping up over and over, right? Where the content of the argument may change, but the driver, whatever is motivating it, really remains the same over and over and over again. You get to uncover that alongside your partner. So that way, in those moments where you're feeling triggered and you can articulate that, they also have that same languaging around it. And they're able to receive that without becoming defensive themselves.
I love having a common language within a household. That's why I'm a huge fan of the Enneagram. And
Mhm.
it's one of the reasons why I have seen so much personal growth and development through that tool,
Mhm.
because it gives us a common language of like, okay, well, these triggers of betrayal and control and possessiveness and manipulation for me,
Mhm.
okay, well, I've discovered that about myself during the time when I haven't had a partner,
Yeah.
so that in preparation for when I do have a partner, I'm like, okay, I'm a lot more self-aware now of what's going to cause me to become defensive,
Yeah.
so that I can create this space of curiosity with a partner of high value who's willing to step into that space.
Yeah. And I love that you bring up the Enneagram, because I think that if that's your language of choice, being in relationship with a partner who's speaking that same language that you don't have to translate everything to, is crucial because when you're bringing up these themes, they're able to, oh, okay, I understand, I get it. And they have context. And I think what context does more than anything in these situations is it just reduces my feeling that I need to defend myself because I'm not meeting your need, right? Which immediately induces shame that I'm not good enough. I can't get it right. It doesn't matter what I do. I just can't win. I hear that statement a lot in couples therapy. I'm in a catch 22 between a rock and a hard place, all these different metaphors.
I
Um,
wish they would communicate better.
right. And so I think it's having this languaging around it makes it so much easier to have these conversations in a way that just takes the responsibility off of me, and it allows me to just hold space for my partner to share what's coming up for them, how they feel triggered, and then I can identify from within, am I in a position to help or to share? Do I feel like that's my desire to do that, not from a unhealthy interdependent state or from a healthily interdependent state? How do I show up for them in this moment? How do I want to show up for them in this moment in light of the fact that I'm aware of what the need is in a clear way that doesn't make me feel like I'm the problem?
Hmm. And all of this kind of finding a common language and communicating better as a couple kind of helps us prevent what you call the couples conflict cycle.
Hmm.
Tell me more about that, because I was super curious after our pre-interview.
Okay. So the couples conflict cycle, from an emotionally focused therapy for couples, or EFT is the abbreviation for that. From an EFT perspective, the couples conflict cycle is the place where the couples get into this negative feedback loop, where you, as my partner, come in and you notice that the dishes didn't get washed and you had this expectation, this very clear expectation that you shared that I was supposed to wash the dishes, and you come in and it's not done. So instantly you go into becoming very critical. You never help, you don't do anything around the house. And then because that partner becomes critical, then it triggers a response behavioral in the other partner, the offending partner who didn't wash the dishes. And while that partner's having their behavioral response of maybe either wanting to shut down or maybe wanting to yell back at you and become defensive or walk out of the room, they're also having this perception, right? A belief about you and a belief about themselves. And those are typically not adaptive or neutral or positive beliefs. They're typically negative beliefs, or what I call kind of cloudy perceptions. It's an idea that you have about things that's not necessarily in line with the reality of the situation in that moment. It's just kind of the overflow of your emotional state. There are also emotions that the couple show to each other, which we would call secondary emotions. But those secondary emotions are really hiding that's the primary emotion underneath. So the primary emotion that might be that betrayal, abandonment, rejection is masquerading as anger, right? Fury, disgust, all of these other things. And so the couples are always caught up in the content of the dishes, right? They're caught up in what didn't get done. They're caught up in the negative thing that was said. They're caught up in the sex that they didn't have. And they're missing everything that's underneath the surface, right? Those primary emotions that are coming up and those unmet attachment needs that are driving this entire dialogue. So the real unmet attachment need for that individual who's freaking out about the dishes could be that I need to have someone who's really a partner for me, right? I need to have someone who's going to show up for me, someone who sees my tiredness and sees how hard I work and just values me as a person, right? So that's all underneath it. But what you're hearing is screaming about the dishes. So the couples get caught up in that cycle of really, I feel like, kind of just chasing your tail. And so the purpose of emotionally focused Emotionally focused therapy for couples. I'm actually looking at a book about it on my desk right now. So I was like reading it and saying it out loud, which is kind of funny. But the purpose of EFT is that couples get the opportunity to understand and identify this cycle in the office when it's not happening. And then they're able to take that information home. And when these arguments are happening at home, they've already identified the cycle. They can articulate the cycle. They have named the cycle. They legit name it. And then when it comes up at home, they get to call it out. And once they call it out, they're speaking that common language like we discussed. And when they're speaking that common language, they can actually communicate what is the attachment need underneath this. And it's a whole lot easier for me to respond to requests to do the dishes when I know that really doing the dishes equals value, that my partner sees that I value them. And chances are, if they see I value them, they really won't be freaking out about the dishes anyway, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that is kind of a synopsis of emotionally focused therapy for couples and the couple conflict cycle. The goal of being able to help couples to see this is that once they're able to use it effectively, they are no longer in a position where they get caught up in it. Right? Instead of being like in this whirlwind, in this tornado, they're actually able to kind of stop it and actually reach out to each other in a more vulnerable way. A great resource for folks who want to kind of do this on their own without a therapist would be Sue Johnson's book, Hold Me Tight. Hold Me Tight actually has like work pages in it where couples can find out what their cycle is.
Awesome. Thank you very much for that resource. And when we were talking before, you painted this picture of like, this is an adult's version of the tantrum that a child throws in the grocery store or when their needs aren't being met.
Absolutely.
And if we could tie together this childhood attachment with an adult attachment and how it holds us back from finding and keeping the love that we want, how would you describe that?
So I would say, as we talked about earlier, my background is in early childhood education. And so I was doing that before I came into the psych field as a therapist. In my experience in early childhood education, one of the most common things that you see in kids that are in that kind of like 0 to 5 age group is this possessiveness over the things that are mine, right? And so when a child is desiring something, maybe in a play space or desiring to use something on a playground, they don't get it, they flip out, right? They don't have the languaging yet to say, this was something that I wanted to use, or I was really excited about this thing, and now you've taken it away from me, and that makes me feel sad, right? I feel hurt. They don't have the languaging around that. To drive it further home in the attachment sense, when a parent drops their child off at an early childhood education center for maybe the first or the second or the third time, there's a lot of fear that comes up in this child that kind of looks like what we would call separation anxiety. And separation anxiety comes from this belief that when I come into this space with these caregivers are not my preferred caregivers. They don't speak my language. And because they don't speak my language, I'm not safe here. So we see a big tantrum, right? A big crying, flipping out, mom, screaming, trying to run down the halls, all those things. The goal of the caregiver in those situations is to be able to create a felt sense on the part of the child that I speak your language, I understand your need, I understand this toy was important to you, I understand mom was important to you. Here's how I'm going to step in and make sure that you're still given, something to enjoy, or make sure that you're given a safe environment. I'm going to show you that I can meet your attachment cues, that if you are hungry, that I can provide you with something to eat. If you're sleepy, I can make sure that you get down to nap. That we're going to actually learn those cues so that kiddo begins to feel safe and secure, and that this is an environment that they can thrive in. And usually when that's done successfully, you see the kids attached to the environment and the caregivers at the preschool, and they have a great day. And a lot of times parents come back, they don't want to leave. And so they're feeling just as secure with those secondary caregivers at home or at school as they are with the primary caregivers at home. In marriage, when couples get caught in this conflict cycle, there's this desire, I need you to be a person that sees me, that hears me, and that loves me, right? And so this desire to be seen, or it's not really even a desire, it's a need to be seen and heard and valued and loved by your partner, is so inherent to who we are as human beings that when those needs are not met, we tend to flip out in different ways. The flip out looks different for different people. For some people, it will be like yelling and screaming and cursing and throwing things, which I think looks a little bit more like the child tantrum. But for others, it's a complete shutdown. I shut down, I shut myself in, and I go into this kind of emotional prison, and I shut my partner out, and there's no way that they can get through to me. And so having our adult version of that tantrum, all it does is create distance, because sadly, for many of us in adulthood, the people that we're surrounded by don't see that attachment continues throughout the lifespan. So we're referred to as needy or being childish if we have any sort of emotional need of our partner in adulthood. We're supposed to be completely independent people who function without the need of any other person or any other thing. And if we're not that, then somehow we're flawed and there's something wrong with us. And so I think seeing how attachment continues from childhood through adulthood helps to identify that those same tantrums that we see in kids also occur in adults, and the remedy is the same. I have to show up for this person. Like this, seeing the person respond in this way is not my cue to get the hell out of Dodge. Like seeing the person in this situation means it's my time to step up and show them I am safe. I see you. I hear you. I value you. I love you.
Mm-hmm. And that criticism of being needy often makes us, we've been talking about shame a lot so far today,
Yeah.
does make us feel ashamed of having needs, which is not a bad thing at all. We all have our needs.
Right.
And creating that space of a safe place helps us have our needs get met and heard and seen.
Yeah. It's hard. I think it's hard for folks sometimes when you're working against that cultural perspective that you're needy, right? And with all the negative connotations that term carries, if you have emotional needs. I find more often than not, it's not that you have an emotional need that is triggering this response from the other person, that this insulting response. It's the fact that you have a need they perceive they cannot meet. And so because they perceive that either they cannot meet your need or your need is greater than what they can kind of satisfy or provide, you're needy, right? You're the problem. And so I would say that's a flag. What color? It depends on the person, the situation, but something to identify as an opportunity for growth in a relationship.
Mm-hmm. I've been looking into this a lot over the last couple years, and there's a pretty consistent need for freedom or independence in the first couple of phases of the relationship.
Mm-hmm.
And if I were to put it in context in my life, jujitsu is incredibly important to me. And if I were too busy in my new relationship to make it to jujitsu, I would start to feel anxious and irritable, and I'm not able to get this stress or frustration out in a physical manner in a safe place like my jujitsu school.
Mm-hmm.
So if I'm, one, not exercising through something intense as the Enya Graham 8 needs, and two, if I'm being prevented from doing that by my partner, then I become resentful and irritable and anxious all at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a need of mine, is for something that I'm doing for myself, not necessarily by myself. My partner is welcome to come kickbox or come to Muay Thai or even join jujitsu. That's an amazing sport for all ages, all sex, all types of people.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a tremendous way to de-stress and condition yourself to fulfill that physical need.
I completely agree. I love Muay Thai. and I completely agree with that. But I think what speaks to that is the need to be seen and heard and valued, right? As a whole person. And part of who you are, Dave, as a whole person is you love jujitsu, right? And you love intense workouts. And so if that's what you love and that's a part of who you are, then in the early phase of the relationship where you're looking to be seen and heard and valued, if you have a partner who's diminishing your ability to do that, it would feel as though you're not being fully seen, right? You're not being fully valued. I think the same goes for people who are very in love with their work, right? I want to be able to do this thing that I love, right? Whatever my career is or my passion is, but I also want to be able to make time for this new relationship. And when your partner keeps placing demands on you or talking about how much you work and how long hours you put in, and you're always attached to your phone and things of that nature, it can feel as though they are devaluing a part of yourself that you feel is very valuable.
Mm-hmm. I think that that's a common conflict between couples, is when one partner maybe pokes at or attacks the purpose of the other.
Mm-hmm.
And as men, we oftentimes fulfill our life's purpose through our work.
Yes.
And that's why when I coach people, we talk about these 5 pillars of optimal health, and spiritual, mental, physical, emotional, and financial.
Mm-hmm.
Well, if our purpose is not tied to the spiritual pillar, then we're going to have to find it through financial,
Right.
or then we're going to have to find it through physical. And that's where we can feel attacked, is if our purpose or our work is our mistress, or we're just devoting too much time there.
Yeah.
Then we're going to have to hear and see our partner's need that's not being met because I work a lot.
Absolutely. And I think there's a struggle. There's a struggle there for new partnerships, right? Because there's this very real need and desire to get to know this person and to be able to have quality time with them, or for some couples to have increased quantity of time, right? Because everything that's happening in your brain in that kind of falling in love phase is like, I want more and more and more of you, right? All of you. And so that desire can definitely be at odds with, right, the desire for the other partner to be able to kind of be in integrity in all of those 5 pillars that you're describing. And so having the courage to have the conversations that are necessary in those early stages of commitment, I think is essential. And to be able to have kind of the right setup and the right languaging to where you're able to own what it is that you need without feeling needy, to own what it is you need, but also have a willingness to compromise and to accept that this other person that you're with has needs as well. And we can't necessarily come in all situations and feel like just because that my need feels strong, that my need is greater than yours.
Mm-hmm. That's right. How do we find a win-win situation for both of our needs to be met the majority of the time? Because it can't be
Right.
all the time. I think Dr. Sarah was telling us that 60% of conflicts can't be resolved. And that's a staggering statistic that as an Enneagram 8, I need to learn to let go.
I find that so I'm a 2, and, and for me it's a lot easier to let it go. I will say that.
That's why we get along so well
Right.
between a helper and a challenger.
And so I would say that, like, in my own marriage, to be able to identify what my partner's needs are, but also as a 2 that's had to do a lot of my own work to not sacrifice my needs or feel like my needs are not as important. Um, it's very essential for my own growth that I be able to articulate them. And then also for me, it's important that I identify, like, what am I really trying to get out of this conversation? it's it's very easy for me to go into a negotiation, if you will, like with no plan and no expectation and all the willingness in the world to bend and to accommodate, because that is my 2-ness. And so it's been a huge hallmark for growth in me personally to be able to go into these conversations and relationship and to be able to communicate, this is the need that I have, and this is what I'm willing to accept. If my need is to be able to have more time with you, that more time doesn't have to look like, you not going to work, which is very important for my husband. It can look like, hey, we're going to get a sitter for the kids so that we can have this time after work instead of coming home and always having to be embroiled in the family stuff, which is again a big 2 thing for me.
Mm-hmm.
Like always doing things with the kids and always like wanting to have these family activities and things at home. So to be able to compartmentalize for myself that I've got to be able to own the time that I spend with the kids is important, but then also put in this container a sitter and time away from them so that I can get the time that I need for my husband without making him have to like change everything about this very important attachment that he has to the financial pillar, right? And so that's an area where it's like I'm giving what I want and I'm getting what I want. There are also, as you said, conflicts that can't be resolved. So times where I kind of walk into a situation realizing that even with all of my education, training, and experience, this may not go the way that I want it to go. And if that's the case, being able to identify like what is my personal practice or spiritual practice to be able to just love on myself in those times where it just feels like I came to you with a need that I had, and I don't necessarily feel like we were able to get to a place of resolution. And so now I just kind of need some comfort. What is it that I can do for myself in those moments if my partner is not accessible or available? Or what is my expectation of my partner in those moments that I hopefully have assertively communicated to them at that point so that they're aware of what my needs are. And so I think if to summarize all of this, if I come back to any one point, it's that being able to have the courage to have these conversations in dating and in marriage is so important. And it speaks to the overall mission, right, that you have of creating this community of authentic daters. And so part of the authenticity that I know I strive to live out on a daily basis is to be able to speak the things that need to be spoken and not swallow them, which has been definitely something that I struggled with in the past. But to be able to speak them in a loving way, in an edifying way as much as possible.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much for sharing that. That was an excellent contribution to the 2-ness that you're talking about, because that's spot on for the tendencies and the fears and the desires of the helper.
Yeah.
So if your message resonates with somebody out there, what's the best way for them to get a hold of you?
I would say the best two ways to get a hold of me, depending on what aspect of the message resonates the most. If they're looking for individual or couples therapy, for sure, reach out to us at Couples Learn, website www.coupleslearn.com. Feel free to follow me or DM on Instagram at sparks_therapist. That's sparks_therapist. So I would say those are probably the two best ways to reach out to me, either personally or professionally, or a hybrid of both, depending.
Awesome. Yes, I'll be sure to put both of those in the show notes below. And
Cool.
beyond that summary that you just gave us, if there's one thing we didn't get to or we touched on briefly that you want to just give us 2 minutes worth of conversation and expand on, what would that be?
I would say just that as someone who really is so passionate about helping people who have experienced trauma to be able to get the love that they want, and to be able to attach and feel secure in relationship, that having experienced trauma, regardless of the type of trauma that it was, does not make you unlovable, does not make you undateable, does not mean that you cannot have a thriving, healthy relationship. You are not damaged, you are not broken. And intentional work may be needed, right, to achieve the goal that you have, to be loved and to be in intimate relationship with a person that really values you and understands how amazing you are. But that work is so worth it, and it will pay off.
Very well said.
Yeah.
I have lived that, I believe, for the past, oh shoot, I guess I found the Enneagram about 3 years ago, and it started to open my eyes to my shadow and the
Yeah.
direction and the path that it was going to help me get back to who I was. And
Yeah.
it helps me identify when I'm wearing a mask and what mask needs to come off in order for me to be my most authentic self.
Yeah. Which is so important. And I love the mission that you have, and love the way that you are creating this community of daters. And I love that it is not just localized, but a global community. And so I'm happy to be a part of it now.
Yes, it was my pleasure to have you on. Thank you so very much. What do you say in the next 6 to 12 months we jump back on and we check in to see where you're at and where the BBR community is as well?
I think that would be super exciting. I would love it.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Shawntres. I appreciate it.
You're welcome, Dave.